Goidsargi Estibaliz Carranza Zabala, known to everyone as Esti, was born on September 6, 1978 in Mexico City. Her father worked as a journalist and political commentator and was known for criticizing the Mexican government. He was targeted by the government for being an activist, and the armed forces were sent to raid his house. At the time, Estibaliz was very young, and the event had a lasting impact on her life. She remembered uniformed men with weapons stepping on her dolls as they walked through the house. After the crackdown, the family moved to Spain to start over from scratch. However, starting a new life in Spain was not easy. Things were tough, and the family lived in a much smaller house than before, since her father wasn't earning as much money as he did in Mexico. He was working from home, spending long hours in front of the typewriter, writing about things he didn't like. Estibaliz became a quiet and insecure girl, and the atmosphere inside the house was often quite dark. School wasn't any better. As a Mexican, Estibaliz felt that others looked down on her. She always struggled to make friends. Although she had some classmates, no one truly considered her a real friend. When her mother had a baby, everything changed. Estibaliz loved her little brother and couldn't wait to become a mother herself one day. At 10 years old, she asked her parents when she would be old enough to get married and have a child. Everyone laughed, but for Estibaliz, all she wanted for her future was to be a wife and a mother. In her teenage years, she started going to local parties and clubs and was approached by many men because of her exotic beauty, but she never got involved with anyone at the time. On one occasion, an older man invited her to a private party. When she arrived at the place, he took her to an empty room, handcuffed her, and did whatever he wanted with her. Estibaliz did not consent and never reported the incident or told anyone about it at the time. At 17, she had her first serious relationship. She fell in love and thought their love would last forever. But when she said she wanted to get married, move to a small, quiet place, and start a family, the young man made it clear he didn't feel the same, and they broke up. Estibaliz was heartbroken. For the first time in her life, she began to have dark thoughts about harming someone, and even imagined various scenarios like cutting the car's brakes or sabotaging the apartment heater to start a fire. But all of it remained only in her imagination, at least for now. Despite her pain and insecurity, Estibaliz graduated high school as one of the best students in her class that year. It didn't take long for her parents to notice she was going through a difficult time, so they decided to find her a job in Germany. They had some friends in that country and sent Estibaliz to work throughout the summer in Berlin. The young woman was excited because she would be far from Barcelona, away from her ex-boyfriend, and all the memories she had of him. Once in Germany, Estibaliz learned the language very quickly and grew to enjoy the German way of life. After the summer, she decided to extend her work visa and got a job at an ice cream shop near Nuremberg, about 4 hours from her parents' friend's house. She decided to start over. Making friends was never her strong suit, but she enjoyed chatting with customers and suppliers. One day, a man walked into the ice cream shop, and Estibaliz froze when she saw him. He was a refrigerator salesman named Holtz and bore some resemblance to Estibaliz's ex-boyfriend from Spain. He was older, but looked like how she imagined her ex would look in his early 30s. At the time, Estibaliz was 22 and Holger was 36, 15 years older. He found her very beautiful and often complimented her. It didn't take long before Holger asked her out, and she accepted. They quickly started dating, and after a few weeks, he proposed. Everything happened fast, but he told Estibaliz they could only be intimate after marriage, and she thought it was the most romantic thing she had ever heard. Holger was Hare Krishna and opposed premarital relations. Soon after, they married in a small ceremony with only a few friends attending. Neither family showed up, feeling the decision to marry was rushed. Estibaliz was a bit apprehensive before the wedding, but chose to keep up appearances. Holger didn't know this at the time, and shortly after the wedding, things started to fall apart between them. Estibaliz said Holger was a nightmare and that she regretted marrying him. He, on the other hand, said she was too skinny and not as attractive as she thought, but soon after they were exchanging vows of love. It was a confusing and turbulent relationship. Estibaliz told her husband every day that she wanted to be a mother, but he said he wasn't ready. Later, the couple decided to move to Berlin, Holger's hometown. Estibaliz found a job at another ice cream shop, and Holger kept working as a refrigerator salesman. When he lost his job, he took on odd jobs to make ends meet. Knowing Estibaliz always wanted to visit the beautiful city of Vienna, Holger suggested they move to Austria and open their own ice cream shop in the town of Eislady. She was skeptical at first, but when Holger promised they could start a family once settled in Vienna, she agreed. It was the best news ever for Estibaliz, who was excited to finally have a child. In Vienna, they lived in a small apartment near an ice cream shop called Schleckeria that they had bought. At first, both Holger and Estibaliz dreamed of making their business profitable and enjoyable. In the summer, the shop was packed with kids, parents, young couples. Everyone loved it because it was well organized and the service was excellent. In winter, they sold coffee, tea, and cakes to keep profits up. From the start, the business was doing well. They had some regular customers and seemed increasingly happy. But soon it became clear that Estibaliz was doing all the work while Holger stayed home, watching TV or browsing the internet. Estibaliz hadn't forgotten her husband's promise to start a family, but Holger was stalling again. She kept insisting, practically begging for a baby, but he always said they would do it later. In fact, Holger completely abstained from intimacy with her. As a Hare Krishna, he believed intimacy was only for procreation, and since he wasn't ready to have children, he didn't sleep with his wife. Maybe Estibaliz's constant insistence on having a baby made him want the opposite. He always said there were more important things in life than intimacy. The couple only went out together once a week to attend Hare Krishna meetings. She didn't follow the movement but felt it was her duty as a wife to accompany him. Suddenly, Holger became interested in firearms and started collecting them. Estibaliz hated guns. She never spoke up or confronted him about it, but inside she was furious. A poisonous snake was growing in her mind. In 2007, Estibaliz met a man who caught her attention. His name was Manfred Hinterberger. He was a 48-year-old ice cream salesman, and their relationship was almost a replay of how Estibaliz and Holger had met. Every time Manfred came to the ice cream shop, he praised her, making her feel like the most beautiful woman in the world, and that was something she loved. The man knew she was married, but also knew she was unhappy. One day, Manfred took a chance and asked her out. The day before, Estibaliz and Holger had argued, which partly influenced her to accept the invitation. They met at a discreet place where they spent a few hours talking and drinking. From that day on, they started an affair. They began meeting regularly at bars and breweries in Vienna, and Estibaliz thought she was finally living the romantic dream. During one of these meetings, Sasha, a 25-year-old who frequented Holger and Estibaliz's ice cream shop, saw the lovers together. Estibaliz lived in constant fear of being discovered, but to her surprise, Sasha never told anyone. Still, it was a big risk, and Estibaliz knew something had to be done because sooner or later she could be found out. Manfred encouraged her to divorce Holger. He said he could manage the ice cream shop better, that she was beautiful, and deserved to experience the best life had to offer. Feeling that her marriage was truly beyond repair and excited about her lover, Estibaliz decided to file for divorce. After the separation, she was free to make her relationship with Manfred official. It didn't take long for her to tell her new love she was eager to have children. However, Manfred wasn't as enthusiastic. He had been married before and had 2 grown children and wasn't interested in having more. Because of this, their relationship worsened as their desires were at odds. Not long after, they decided to end things, and Estibaliz was completely shaken. Meanwhile, Holger refused to leave the apartment even though they were no longer married. Estibaliz felt she had more right to stay since she managed the ice cream shop, and Holger never supported her financially. This led to many fights. Suddenly, Estibaliz remembered the dark thought she had after breaking up with her high school boyfriend. She found herself thinking it would be a relief to get Holger out of her life. Then, on April 27, 2008, Estibaliz returned home after a long day at the shop, the bright, cheerful place where children and their parents often came. In contrast, her home was filled with tension. Holger spent all day sitting in front of the computer, and Estibaliz decided to have a serious talk with him. She asked once again for him to move out so they could each move on with their lives. According to Estibaliz, Holger called her useless and said she wouldn't be able to live on her own. At that point, she felt there was no other way, and that she had to take drastic action to remove him from her life. To justify her actions, she told herself he was nothing but a controlling, exploitative man. After the argument, Holger turned his back and kept working on the computer. She noticed some of his firearms on the dining room table. Estibaliz then picked up a .22 caliber Beretta, aimed it at her ex-husband's head, and pulled the trigger twice. She then moved closer and fired once more. After that, she simply turned around, put the gun on the table, grabbed her purse, and left the apartment. Meanwhile, Estibaliz was secretly chatting online with another man and invited herself to spend the night with him. The next morning, she went straight to work, trying to forget her ex-husband's body in the apartment. After work, she realized she couldn't run away anymore and had to go back to the apartment to deal with the situation. When she opened the door, a mix of relief and horror washed over her, seeing Holger in the same position she had left him. At that moment, Estibaliz decided the best way to get rid of his body was to burn it. She soaked him in gasoline and set fire to him inside the apartment. Soon, thick smoke filled the place, and a concerned neighbor called the fire department. Estibaliz opened the front door to let some smoke out and saw 2 firefighters approaching. Using all her charm, she convinced them nothing was wrong, saying she had just forgotten a chicken in the oven. Fortunately, they believed her and left. As hours passed, the pressure became unbearable for Estibaliz, so she took a shower and went to her internet lover's house, leaving Holger half-burned in the chair in front of the computer. When she returned the next day, the smell of decomposition had taken over the apartment. A neighbor knocked politely on the door and asked if she was cooking fish because of the bad smell coming from inside. She said yes and apologized to the lady. Estibaliz realized she couldn't wait any longer and needed to get rid of Holger's body. So she came up with a plan. Holger was a big man, weighing about 287 pounds, and Estibaliz was small. She would never be able to drag his body downstairs. The only way to dispose of him was by cutting him up. That's when she decided to buy a chainsaw. She went to a hardware store and bought everything she needed. When she returned to the apartment, she laid out a tarp on the floor and started the process. It was very intense for her, so she stopped to rest. Afterward, she cleaned up and went back to her lover's house, leaving what was once Holger scattered across the room. The next day, Estibaliz returned to finish the job. She put the parts of her ex-husband into buckets and filled them with concrete. Hours later, when the concrete had dried, she managed to carry the heavy buckets downstairs. She then called a taxi to take her to the ice cream shop, about 984 feet away. She told the driver she was renovating the house, so he didn't question the buckets filled with concrete. Later, she took the concrete-filled buckets to the basement of her ice cream shop because the place reminded her of a cemetery. It was calm and peaceful, and she thought Holger could rest there in peace. In her mind, she could keep him close and even talk to him from time to time. Back at the apartment, there was blood everywhere, and Estibaliz had to clean it all up before anyone noticed. It took her several days to make the place completely spotless. Since the couple were foreigners in Vienna, they didn't have many close acquaintances in the country, so no one noticed Holger had disappeared. Estibaliz was the only person who knew what had really happened to her ex-husband. To friends who knew the couple, she said Holger had moved out of the country after the divorce. Estibaliz continued with her life, running her ice cream shop and looking for true love. 3 years later, she rekindled her relationship with Manfred, but he seemed interested only in fun and said they should have an open relationship since he wasn't ready to be exclusively hers. This deeply frustrated her. Estibaliz couldn't believe Manfred expected and accepted her sleeping with other men while with him. All she wanted was to marry and start a family. She also wouldn't accept sharing him with anyone and once went through his phone and emails to check if he was cheating, discovering nude photos of women, which made her furious. In her mind, Estibaliz blamed Manfred for what she had done to her ex-husband. To her, if he hadn't encouraged her to leave him, she wouldn't have shot Holger, and once again, the dark fantasies returned. At the end of November 2010, Estibaliz struck again. One morning, she noticed Manfred had spent the entire night online. As soon as he left for work, she started checking his browsing history and found he was chatting with several women on an online dating platform. Estibaliz was furious, especially because, according to her, the women Manfred talked to were nothing like her. He looked for women with athletic bodies who liked sports. That broke her inside, knowing others thought she was too skinny. She spent the day trying to forget what she had seen but couldn't. Later, she tried to cheer up, bought a ticket to Barcelona, and planned to spend Christmas with her family. But the trip fell through and she was still angry at Manfred. Her only comfort was retreating into her fantasy world, where she ended Manfred. She even bought a new chainsaw and some bags of concrete to make the fantasy more real, and took a course to learn how to work better with cement. She said this time she'd do her best. It would be planned, not improvised like last time. One night in late November, Estibaliz and Manfred went out on a date. First, they walked in the park, then took a taxi to the museum district, where a friend had a punch stand. They drank one mulled wine after another and got a little drunk. Manfred started looking at other women, Estibaliz confronted him, and they began arguing. When they got home just after midnight, they had another fight. He said he didn't mean any harm and thought he was addicted to women. But Estibaliz gave him an ultimatum. Either he got therapy or they shouldn't see each other anymore. Manfred refused and said she wasn't obligated to stay with him. After the argument, he went to bed, turned his face to the wall, and started snoring. Estibaliz got even angrier and decided to end Manfred right then and there. She had a gun under the mattress, took it, loaded it, and shot him 4 times. Then she left him lying on the bed and slept beside him. The next morning, when she woke up and saw what she had done, she started crying and begged for forgiveness, but quickly pulled herself together because she had to work on covering her tracks. This time she was much more efficient, remembering the difficulties she faced after committing her first crime. But there was one problem. Unlike Holger, Manfred was a native of Vienna, and soon his family and friends noticed his disappearance and naturally connected it to Estibaliz. She said she had no idea where he could be. She even went to the police station to report him missing about 6 days after the crime, even though she knew very well Manfred was no longer alive. He suffered the same fate as Holger. He was shot, dismembered, placed in plastic buckets filled with cement, which were later stored in the ice cream shop basement. After everything was done, she went out to get her nails done. To friends, Estibaliz pretended to be worried about Manfred's disappearance. She played the victim, saying he simply didn't love her enough to stay. At that time, one of Manfred's friends, a 47-year-old man named Roland, took care of Estibaliz. He took her out to dinner and started spending a lot of time with her. Eventually, the friendship turned into a relationship. However, Roland was already committed, but that wasn't a problem. By January 2011, he broke up with his girlfriend to be with Estibaliz. They seemed very happy, and after 5 months of dating, Estibaliz discovered she was pregnant. Roland was surprised but happy. He proposed to her, and she said yes. Finally, it seemed all of Estibaliz's dreams were coming true. Her ice cream shop was doing very well. She had a kind man who loved her. She was engaged and expecting a child. But all of that was about to collapse. On June 6, 2011, around 9 a.m., Estibaliz walked the 984 feet from her apartment to her ice cream shop. When she entered, she felt tension in the air. A man in overalls passed by, and she asked some customers who he was and what was happening. The man was a plumber, called because the beauty salon next door had a leak. When the plumber entered the basement to fix it, he had to break down a locked door that led to the ice cream shop's basement. Customers whispered that the plumber had found something horrible down there. Buckets containing body parts were stored in small freezers, and air purifiers were scattered everywhere trying to mask the smell. Everyone was already speculating if what was inside the buckets was what remained of Manfred. Estibaliz laughed, gave an excuse, and left the ice cream shop as fast as she could. Meanwhile, several police vehicles arrived and cordoned off the area. The woman's instinct was to flee. Acting rationally, she went to the bank at the corner of her shop to withdraw all her savings. However, the line at the bank was very long, and while waiting, she realized she needed her savings book, which was back at the ice cream shop. By then, the police had already closed off the whole street, and she didn't dare go back. She called a woman who worked as a cleaner in her house. Feeling the woman was probably her most trusted friend, she asked her to meet at a nearby bridge and bring her savings book. The woman agreed. While waiting, Estibaliz grew increasingly tense, wondering if the cleaner would hand her over to the authorities or help her. Surprisingly, the woman brought her things. They hugged and cried but said nothing. Both knew they'd probably never see each other again. At the bank, Estibaliz withdrew a total of 10,000 euros from her savings. Relieved she'd gotten the money, she realized it was time for the second part of her plan, to escape. But her passport was still at her apartment, and she couldn't risk going there because the police were everywhere. Luckily, she saw one of her clients driving by and approaching the corner where she was. It was Sasha, the same young man who once saw her with Manfred when they were still lovers. She signaled, and he stopped. Estibaliz jumped into the car and got straight to the point, telling him the police were after her because of something Manfred had done. She asked if he could pick up her passport from the apartment. The young man said nothing but silently agreed. He stopped on a side street near the apartment, left the car running, and told her if he didn't return within 15 minutes, she should run. The young man said nothing but silently agreed. He stopped on a side street near the apartment, left the car running, and told her if he didn't return within 15 minutes, she should run. Like with the cleaner, Estibaliz wasn't sure she could fully trust him. But he came back. The only problem was he had grabbed her Mexican passport, not the Spanish one. She asked him to go back, but the young man got scared. She started crying and begged him to buy a SIM card in her name and then take her to the airport. Sasha agreed again, but on the way back to the car, he called a taxi, gave her the SIM card and left, wishing her luck. At the airport, she wrote a note to Roland, asking him to meet her there immediately, and included her new number. Then she gave the note and some money to the taxi driver, asking to be taken to Roland's workplace. Estibaliz waited in the departure lounge, feeling overwhelmed and unsure where to go. She looked up the first international flight leaving. It was a flight to Paris. She bought a ticket but never made it to the boarding gate. At that moment, her phone rang. It was Roland. She saw him in the distance, searching through the crowd, confused about what was happening. She told him she was going to Spain because her father was very ill and terminal. He didn't believe her and pressed her to tell the truth. But all she could do was apologize for the terrible things she had done. After that, Roland returned to his car and left. Estibaliz realized she risked being caught at the airport, so she gave up on the trip and took a taxi to a train station. But the station didn't have international tickets, so she decided to take another taxi and asked the driver to take her to Udine, a city in Italy, about a 5-hour drive from Vienna. The driver found it suspicious. The trip was long and expensive, but she said she was a dancer and had to be there on time for a performance. Inside the car, the local radio talked about the terrible discovery at Schleckeria ice cream shop. On the way to Italy, she admitted to the driver that she was running from the police. The man then said he would take her to the nearest town. Once there, she convinced him to book a hotel room under his name, and he agreed. Estibaliz spent a night in Cavazzo but couldn't sleep due to worry. The next morning, while having breakfast, she made friends with another guest and asked for a ride to Udine. When she arrived in Udine, Estibaliz went straight to a beauty salon. She cut and dyed her hair darker to change her appearance. For a moment, she felt her plan was working. Meanwhile, the taxi driver reported to the police that she was heading to Italy and gave them the name of the hotel where he dropped her off. But since it was the next day, by the time the police arrived at the hotel, she had already left. In Udine, Estibaliz befriended a street musician named Ivan, whom she saw playing in a park. She told him a sad story about her violent husband, saying she was a victim of domestic abuse and had come to Udine to hide. Estibaliz asked Ivan if she could stay with him for a day or two, making it clear she wouldn't sleep with him and offering money for accommodation. Ivan agreed and took her into his home. Eventually, he grew suspicious of the pregnant woman. She seemed obsessed with the case involving an ice cream shop in Austria, so he put 2 and 2 together and decided to alert the police. On the morning of June 10, 2011, 4 officers went to Ivan's house and arrested Estibaliz Carranza. The morning of her arrest, she started bleeding and feared she was about to lose her baby, so she decided to confess everything to ensure she would be taken to the hospital and her baby would be safe. With a full confession in hand, authorities extradited her to Austria, where she was placed in pre-trial detention awaiting trial. During this time, in January 2012, she gave birth to a boy, whom she named Roland. After his birth, the boy's father, her fiancé Roland, decided to marry Estibaliz. People were outraged. Why would he marry a convicted criminal? But he said Estibaliz was the most wonderful woman in the world, and that he was willing to wait for her no matter how long it took for her to be released. Estibaliz also spoke a lot about her feelings for Roland. She claimed he was nothing like her previous partners, who had been her victims. He was kind and loving. She said that if she had met Roland earlier, she would never have taken anyone's life. Child custody was granted to Estibaliz's parents, who lived in Barcelona, a decision Roland disagreed with but couldn't change. In November 2012, Estibaliz Carranza's trial began in Vienna, Austria. It lasted 4 days, with a total of 50 witnesses called. Estibaliz appeared at court dressed elegantly. In her defense, she claimed that Holger and Manfred were possessive and violent, and that she had no other choice. She often cried during her testimony. The prosecution knew their biggest challenge was convincing the jury that someone so elegant and sweet-voiced could be a cold and calculating criminal. The fact was she was very attractive, with a vulnerable appearance and big brown eyes that won everyone's sympathy. But the jury wasn't fooled by appearances. The prosecution also presented photos of the contents of the buckets she had hidden in the ice cream shop's basement, shocking everyone present. Estibaliz Carranza was found guilty and sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. The court also ordered a psychiatric evaluation, which deemed her mentally unstable. The report stated that Estibaliz saw herself as a princess whose greatest wish was to be rescued by a Prince Charming, and if the men who entered her life didn't meet her expectations, she killed them. Psychologists concluded she had a personality disorder and doubted whether she could kill again. Throughout, she portrayed herself as a vulnerable woman with a weak spirit whose only desire was to live a normal life. In prison, Estibaliz spent her time studying and even wrote a book titled My Two Lives, The True Story of Ice Lady. All the income from that book went to her son. If Estibaliz was truly a victim of emotional abuse by her husband and boyfriend, she never talked to anyone about it or sought help. In both cases, she wasn't in immediate danger and had enough financial resources to support herself. She could have simply left, but instead chose to take their lives. The number of people she manipulated while on the run shows her cold-blooded nature. Many were deceived, proving she's far from a helpless, fragile woman. In 2015, she and Roland divorced. Some reports say the split was due to constant arguments over child custody. In 2017, she was transferred from the women's prison in Schwarzau to a men's prison near Linz, becoming the first female inmate there. Judges said the transfer happened because she was inciting revolts and involved in multiple fights in the women's prison. Her stay was supposed to be temporary, but in September 2018, Estibaliz fell in love with a fellow inmate and decided to stay. About this new romance, she said, "Martin has a personality disorder combined with borderline syndrome and narcissism. Because of this, he has a violent temper. His criminal energy is particularly high. He is a pathological liar. Unlike me, Martin is classified as a psychopath, and I think that because of this, he makes the darkness inside my heart resonate. That's good. It's time for me to truly meet this other side of myself." It's a chilling statement, one that reveals just how far she had slipped into her own darkness.